I decided to get married, I would never take his last name. I would use my maiden name. So you'd use your father's name? No, I'm going to use my mother's maiden name. So your grandfather's name. Okay, got it.
Welcome to The Wall. In today's video, we'll be addressing a highly controversial topic that the one with the purple hair is trying to promote: the idea that children and wives shouldn't take the man's last name. Many argue that this is oppressive and patriarchal. Before we begin, we want to thank you for being here. Your support means a lot to us. If you enjoy what you see, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. We'd also love to hear about your experiences in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow and reach more people. Thank you for being part of our project. Let's get started.
I would never take his last name. I would use my maiden name. So you'd use your father?
I've been writing about feminism for 20 years, and this still remains one of the top issues that gets people so upset, so pressed. They get really riled up about this. The video I stitched is actually a really good response to this argument. The name you grew up with is your name. That is part of your identity. It's yours. And I think people really need to ask, why are so many people jumping through hoops to pretend as if this is not sexist? It is incredibly sexist, very explicitly so. Now, that doesn't mean you're a bad feminist, right? We all make different negotiations in a patriarchal world. That's fine. But let's not pretend that this is not really explicitly sexist. And if it was no big deal, and if it's just tradition, if it's you want one family name, why don't men do it?
Here's your response. What is the real benefit for the man in marriage? In almost 95% of divorces, the man loses everything, including custody of the children. The only benefit, at least on paper, is having your surname in the family. So when you talk about your family in a public place or legal document, it will be Mr. Castillo and Mrs. Lucero, for example. The children will also carry two last names because everything is sexist to not give any benefit to the man. Now, if you're a millionaire, I assure you they'll want your surname because at least it has a renowned name. That's why fewer and fewer men want to get married every day. I don't know what man would truly accept this because your father gives you your surname, which will be passed down through generations to his family. Why on earth would I continue passing on another man's surname in my family when he's already formed his own? Why does he still have influence on mine? Also, how will our children have two different surnames, especially the male child? Who will carry your surname to your grandchildren? Let me know in the comments what you think about this.
How do you feel about women taking men's last names when they get married?
No. We do not live in a patriarchy. I think that's extinct and it should not be a thing anymore. I definitely think it's the woman's choice.
Don't do it. You're gonna divorce him.
I feel like that's a personal.
Feels like it's going.
Feels like a.
Although I just talked to somebody yesterday about this who was like, my last name is really boring, and so I want to lose it.
I don't think it should be really a norm.
I would keep mine.
Yeah.
I think, but keep my husband's too.
In my culture, the women don't take men's last names. So yeah, it's definitely just a choice.
Will not marry a girl if she doesn't take my last name.
Would you hyphenate?
No. No. Hold on. I know. It's the smallest sign of showing your child or children that you're not completely on the same page. You can't agree to just one name for your family. So instead, you're trying to do both parts instead of unifying as one name. Women get the fancy ring. They get most of the input on the marriage. I feel like the name is not a bad trade-off. Yeah. That's my thought.
What's the benefit for the man at all? She takes everything. Unless she's willing to sign a prenup before marriage to keep her surname, then we wouldn't have a problem at least gaining something. But she doesn't want to lose anything. So what do you gain? Also, why get married if you don't want to be part of this man's family? I understand that if you divorce, you can go back to your maiden name, but if you got married, it's to become one. So why don't you want to be Mrs. Castillo? That's how it would be presented, Mr. and Mrs. Castillo, for example. Every day, men's rights are diminishing. Men these days are afraid to say important things. Do you think someone like Trump, Obama, Ford, Rockefeller, those men who have achieved something in life, their wives wouldn't support them? Do you think they would accept their surname being put on the back burner? Women don't understand that a man's surname is his legacy. Once it's tarnished, what's left?
Did you guys know that in Islam, women are not required to take the names of their husbands? In the West and cultures around the world, women continue to take the last names of their husbands without really knowing where this tradition originates from. So the tradition of taking the husband's last name after marriage comes from a deeply patriarchal society where women would essentially become the husband's property after marriage. So husbands would have complete control over their wives legally, financially, and women wouldn't even have rights over their own children. Now, in Islam, women were given rights to ownership, inheritance, financial independence, individual sovereignty, all without marriage or ownership of a husband, and they were not considered as property. Today, many women around the world still practice the tradition of taking their husband's last name, but I find it interesting how many women don't know where this tradition originates from. And that includes myself. Up until 3 years ago, before I started studying Islam, I never really thought about it or knew where this tradition came from. And I find it so interesting and comical almost how Western women view Muslim women through like this lens of like they're victims and they're oppressed. Meanwhile, Muslim women in Islam were given rights almost 1,300 years before women in the West. So next time, before you view Muslim women as victims or oppressed, you should probably study the religion and learn about the rights that Islam gave to us long before you.
According to what she says, it's better not to take the man's surname. But you know what's practiced more in Islam. First, if a woman divorces, she must provide strong evidence for why she's divorcing. Second, there's only a 3-month maintenance period after which she's on her own. Third, the woman has rights to the children when they're young. Only at a certain age does the father also have custody rights. Fourth, and perhaps the most beautiful aspect of all, asset division doesn't exist in some Islamic countries. In others, it depends on jurisdiction, which usually isn't abusive towards the man, unlike in the West where they'll take everything they can and make you pay alimony. If what marriage in the West offered me was like this, along with a devout wife who rarely divorces because divorce rates are the lowest in the world, then I wouldn't mind if you didn't take my surname. But if you don't offer me these privileges, not even a prenup, then where do I gain in marrying you? Don't you think so, brothers?
I was watching a TikTok earlier and the lady, her stitches were turned off. If you happen to see it, please tag her. But she was basically putting a question out, why in 2023 are women still trying to take their husband's name? I'm going to come at this from a completely different angle. Where I live, actually, we're not allowed to change our names. Or if you did want to change your name, it's a lengthy, almost impossible process. When I got married, there was no one taking anyone's name. So the only one who has my husband's family name is my daughter. If I could, I would have taken his name. I would have taken anyone's name. Okay, maybe not anyone. And the reason I say this is because I have obviously my father's last name, but he has never been in my life, ever. And I remember in my teens, I was inquiring of how I can change my name to my mom's last name because, again, I have, at least growing up, really, I don't have a connection to that side of my family. Now, after, bumping into siblings and being able to meet more family randomly with no help to him, is how I was able to piece together kind of my dad's side. And ultimately, I remember clearly thinking that, I want to change my name. I don't know why I have this person's last name because I don't feel a connection. And then now when I got married, I remember the pastor was telling us that, listen, if you did want to take your husband's last name, you can go into the neighboring province, Ontario, and have just the ceremony at the court or whatever it is, and then come back and do everything here if you really did want to take his name. And I remember at that point very clearly being like, is this something I really want? I remember entertaining my husband was like, it's not that serious. And I was like, for you, ultimately now it is what it is. But, not that I feel left out, but I just feel like I don't match because my husband and my daughter, they both have the same last name. Like if we're traveling in our passports, I know it's not that serious, but, listen, do whatever it is that you want to do. But like I said, coming at this from a different perspective that I would gladly have taken his name. And he has a beautiful last name too.
Absolutely, because it's not a family. It's two separate people living together. For that, it's better to just live together without getting married. What's the point of marrying if we won't even have the same surname, which doesn't allow us to be called Mr. and Mrs. whatever the surname is? Also, when my children with my surname are called and you show up with another name, what will you say? This is why I say men these days don't want to get married. When you take away all the privileges that make marriage beautiful for him, let's be honest, if I don't marry you, I'll still sleep with you, we'll still live together, we'll still have children, and I'll be more protected in case you come after my assets, and my children will have my surname. But she doesn't want to lose anything or sacrifice anything ever. That's why I say the only one who marries for love is the man. The woman marries for a lifestyle. She'll win at everything. In the end, you feel like a man that she was never really yours. She just sold you a dream, a moment in her presence, and that your marriage was a sham because you weren't even legally married in front of society. Let's watch the other video. I'll explain it better there.
One of my biggest regrets, and one that I'm still living with the implications of today, is taking my ex-husband's last name. Now, bear with me because it's not fun to talk about things not working out possibly. But with these traditions that we're carrying on into our lives, this one life that we have to live, we need to be so intentional and think about the origins and what they truly mean. What are we taking part of? Just because it's the norm doesn't mean that it's right or that it's something that we should do. And I wish I had that mentality when I was 19 and I got married, but I didn't. I was a young little girl in love. I took his last name. I felt like part of my identity was lost. I grieved it, but I did it anyway because it was right. It was what I was supposed to do in order to be a family. I had kids, 3 kids, gave them his last name because he needed to carry on his legacy or whatever. The problem was 15 years later when I wanted a divorce, and it hit me like a freight train that if I wanted to change my name back to my maiden name, my true identity, the only name that I really felt like was me, because guess what? It was me. I was now going to not have the same last name as my kids. Now here's the kicker. When I talk, I hate saying that. I say that all the time. Here's the kicker. Whatever. I don't know why I say that. I only say that in videos, I think. Here's the thing. When I talk to women all the time about the possibility of keeping their maiden name, the first thing they always say to me is, well, no, I don't want to change. Like, I don't want to keep my maiden name because then I won't have the same last name as my kids. I think to myself, how conditioned are we? We don't even think of another possible scenario, like the kids take our last name. Heaven forbid, we give birth to these children, we grow them inside of us, we feed them off of our bodies. We put a lot into bringing these people into the world, but it's not even a part of a possibility for them to have our last name. I really hope that changes in the future. I feel like Gen Z is so much more intentional with these things, so I have hope for the future. But let me give you 2 possible scenarios that could go wrong if you choose to give up those rights and give your husband's name to your children. One possibility is that he gets remarried again. I was sitting in court. I hear the judge say the new Mrs. and his last name, and I realized, holy cow. Now, if I change my last name back to my maiden name, the kids are going to share a last name with her and him, and they will look like a family unit. Yeah, that's one possible scenario. Second possible scenario is that we all keep the same last name. So now he has 2 wives with the same last name. Even one's an ex, but we all are sharing the same last name. That's not very comfortable either. And then the third scenario is, and the only possible way to truly secure that you continue having the name as your kids, the same name as your kids, is to give them your last name from the beginning. And if your husband wants to be a part of that family unit, and it's really important to him to share the same last name, then he can take your last name. I know, so out in left field, right? Crazy. What is she thinking? But think about where these traditions are stemming from and why not. And on the other side, I don't believe you have to share the same last name to be a family unit. I currently have my maiden name. I'm married to a man who has his maiden name, and the kids have their dad's last name. We're a happy family.
This is the problem with women when they become feminists. At first, she said she married for love, took her husband's surname, but when she got divorced, she went back to her maiden name, developed hatred towards her ex-husband. She envies that her 3 children, whom her husband supported all their lives, carry his surname, and she doesn't share it with her maiden name because they are the legacy of that man who will surely leave them a better inheritance than her. In a world where only the woman knows the child is hers, where she gets offended if the man asks for a DNA test, they also want the children he has to support not to have his surname but hers. Of course, you will have the obligation to support them for 18 years, while she only had to do it for 9 months. But you, 18 years. You'll have the burden but not the authority. And we all know that responsibility without authority is simply slavery. This is the advice of a divorced woman who in another video tried to screw her ex-husband in a divorce. Because of things like this, I say Western women have become masculine. I bet if you put her surname instead of yours and make a will stating that only those who share your surname, including the wife, will receive the inheritance, She would scream bloody murder and even try to change it because she doesn't want to lose in anything. When before, the first child carrying the father's name and surname was a blessing, now they want to take that right away from the man. Brothers, where is the benefit of getting married? We've reached the end of the video, but before we go, the questions are for you. What do you think about women not taking their husband's surname? Would you be okay with getting married and your family having 2 last names instead of yours? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to create more content. Stay tuned for the next exciting video from The Wall.